A Plaguelands Media production.
Hey everyone, this is Hugh from Plaguelands Media bringing you another book review today. Now, this is kind of a special one because I'm really throwing this out there for one person, my good friend Luke Carmen, who wanted me to let everyone know in this video that he's one smart cookie because he graduated from Yale College, Harvard, where he aced every semester and got an A. And if you know what that reference is from, leave a like and comment down below. But with all joking aside, I am a little pissed off with my friend Luke. I have known Luke for over 20 years. And in all that time, we have discussed our love of literature. We actually met at university. We were both learning creative writing. He went on to become a successful author with 2 published books, 3 if you include the collection of short stories that he contributed to for Plaguelands Media. And in all that time, when we discussed literature, we would discuss hoity-toity books like Jack Kerouac's On the Road or Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. And it wasn't until recently that I discovered my good buddy has a love of fantasy literature. Had I known this 20 years ago, we could have been talking about all sorts of great books, and he could have recommended some books that I actually haven't read, which is what this book review is going to be about today. He recommended to me Legend by David Gemmell. Now, this book was initially published in 1984, I believe. Yes, 1984. That was around the time that I was reading or getting into fantasy, I should say, with the fighting fantasy books and things like that. I remember seeing the cover for this book at the bookstore when I started to get more into fantasy literature, but at the time I was reading Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms and would kind of pass on fantasy novels like this one. So he name-dropped David Gemmell, recommended Legend to me. I picked up a copy and figured I would give this a go. So today I'm going to give you and Luke, you smarmy bastard, my thoughts on Legend by David Gemmell. So let's get straight into another episode of Where do I begin with this one? This book was a little bit misleading. When you read the blurb on the back, it talks about Druss, captain of the Axe, a legendary warrior. So you think, oh, okay, the name Legend, legendary warrior. The whole blurb is about Druss himself. But the book starts with a really interesting prologue where an ambassador of the Draenei people has gone up to see Ulrich of the Wolf's Head to try and kind of get a treaty going between the Nadir and the Draenei, which ultimately doesn't succeed. So the prologue sets up a really interesting premise for the story, and then we go to the character of Rek. Rek is a coward, and he is basically has heard that the Nadir are going to invade Draenei, and he's like, I don't want any part of this, I'm fucking off. And so he starts to kind of flee south. You do get a little bit of backstory about Rek and his adoptive father and all of this kind of stuff. Well, it's all interesting, but the character of Rek initially kind of pisses you off. Rek is going through the forest. He finds a woman in distress, Vire, and ultimately ends up rescuing her. Initially, they hate each other, and then within the span of a chapter, they're in love. And that was a huge issue for me. Like, it was very unrealistic, really boring. How quickly the two of them kind of hook up and get together. Then you meet the character of Druss. He's an old man living in the mountains. His wife has passed away. He's got nothing going for him. And an old friend of his says, listen, the Nadir are going to invade our keep. Dros Delnak is going to be the first hit. Can you come down and help us kind of get rid of this wave of attackers? Okay, cool. That's all good. In the meantime, Rek and Vire, and I'm probably butchering these names, but that's okay. It's a fantasy novel. I can call them whatever they want. No one fucking cares. Go to the 30, which are this group of like warrior monks, and she asks them for help, and they've got telepathic abilities and all this kind of really cool stuff. It's, I guess, the magic system that they're kind of going for. Okay, that's cool. And they all head to Dros Delnak. That is where the real meat and potatoes of the story is, because this is effectively a book about a siege. It's a book about the futility of war. It's a book about how men cope with war. And most of the book is the siege of Dros Delnak, where Druss comes down to train the farmers that are kind of sticking around as this army. The king has sent his nephew to lead, but his nephew's a whimpering, sniveling little git at the beginning. Spoiler alert, one of the best characters by the end of the novel. You get a lot of different perspectives here. You get Druss, you get Hogan, you get Bowman, who is... Druss goes and recruits him to get archers to man the walls. You get Oren, the nephew of the king. You kind of get his perspective. It's a real mix of how different characters, or I should say how different types of men and women cope with war. So the Nadir army is friggin' monstrous. Like hundreds of thousands of warriors. And Ulrich is kind of like this tribesman who has recruited all the other tribes of the Nadir under one banner, which is unprecedented. Rek and Vire in the 30 make it to the keep in time for the battle, and then the battle begins as the Nadir slowly kind of come in and break down wall after wall after wall to try and take over Dros Delnak. Now, here's the interesting thing. Ulrich of the Wolf's Head, a fascinating character, because in a typical fantasy novel, you know who the good guys are and you know who the bad guys are. Good king, evil wizard. Evil dragon riders, good heroes. It's very obvious who is good and who is bad. And in this book, we're rooting for the Draenei because that's where we were introduced to the characters. But Ulrich and the Nadir are not inherently evil. They do some evil things in the butchering of Golgothir. But I don't believe the Nadir are evil. At one point in the book, one of the characters says the only reason they are doing this is because it's happened to them in the past. And so now it's their time to kind of rise up. It just reminds you of any historical civilization that went out and conquered, like the Romans or the Macedonians or any other civilization like that. They're not bad people. It's just we're looking at it from the perspective of they're bad people, which is an absolutely fascinating way for a fantasy novel to be written. I'm not going to go into what happens. There are some shocking moments in this. There was one chapter where I had to actually put the book down because it almost broke me. An incredibly poignant and sad chapter just dealing with characters that we had never actually met in the book before. The miller, and his wife, wants to leave the city before the nadir arrive, and the miller believes that it's his duty to stay there, and it was an incredibly heartbreaking chapter in a book that is full of these moments. This is one of the best fantasy novels I've read. David Gemmell, who has sadly passed away now, is often regarded as one of the greatest modern fantasy authors, and I can understand why. There are some story beats at the beginning of the book that don't really work all that well. The showdown between Rek and Vire and Reinhard in the forest is one, although that kind of plays itself out a little bit later on. There are a lot of interconnected stories that are kind of weaving through this book. And at the beginning, you're going to feel like you're going to get lost. But it ultimately all pays off in the end. We're introduced to a lot of characters. We're introduced to about 5 of the 30 the key warrior monks. We have Rek, Vire, Hogun, Orin, Druss, Kassa, Bowman, a whole lot. The surgeon, can't remember the surgeon's name right now. And you think you're going to lose track, but you actually never do. It's that well written and that well connected together. What I did find particularly interesting, and it was a pet peeve, there is no map. I do enjoy it when a book provides a map of the land. I have heard that later books do have a map included of the land, but this one didn't, which was a little annoying, but not a deal breaker, of course. This is also a standalone novel, which surprised me because he created such a rich world that you would think that this would be like book 1 in a trilogy. It's actually not. It is book 1 in the Draenei saga, which has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 books in it. He does come back and revisit the character of Druss in a prequel story. All through this book, you get the legend of Druss and how he traveled across the land to rescue his wife. He traveled for 5 years after his wife had been kidnapped by slavers. And he did go back and actually write the novel of that adventure, which I'm very much looking forward to reading. But the next book in this series actually starts 100 years after this one. The epilogue in this book gives you exactly what happens to all the characters, which is nice. Felt a little rushed. Pardon me, the epilogue did, but I'm not going to complain. David Gemmell has now become one of my favorite authors, and I've only ever read one book of his. So that is a testament to not only the style, but the world, the characters, the conflict. There is an amazing scene where the defenders of Dros Delnak have all but given up hope. And they say, well, if we're going to die, let's at least have a party. Let's at least celebrate our death. We did a fantastic thing here. And then one of them suggests, why don't we go into the enemy camp? Let them buy our drinks for us. Which they do, and that's when you get the idea that Ulrich and the Nadir, they're not inherently evil. There is a code of honor there. There is a sense of honor. It was a fantastic chapter where the heroes of Dros Delnak get to eat and drink and celebrate with the people that are effectively wanting to kill them in this under this umbrella of truce after a very tragic event, where Rek, who is the Earl of Dros Delnak, the new Earl of Dros Delnak, gets to break bread and talk with Ulrich, and they share stories and they learn about one another. And then at the end, Ulrich says, "I'm sorry, you're going to have to die tomorrow." And Wrecker's like, maybe, maybe not. We'll see what happens. It was a really touching moment, and one that I think is a testament to breaking the mold of fantasy novels in general. I think David Gemmell, by today's standards, is very underrated, in as much as people who didn't grow up in that time probably haven't heard of him or probably haven't read about him or read any of his work, which I think is incredibly sad. I've always said, especially when talking to my good friends Luke and Ian, it's very sad that at least teenagers today and people growing up are not going to be growing up on the literature that we did. I'm not saying that new books are bad. By all means, they are not. I've got a ton of them behind me right here. But I am saying that someone like, let's say a 17-year-old kid picks up a copy of Stephen King's It and starts reading it and thinks, well, this is stupid because they don't understand the time period that the book was set in. The 50s very different to now. Heck, the 60s when it was kind of set, 60s and 70s, very different to now. Even the movies, you can tell, like back in the day, very, very different. And I think that's where Legend, that's the sort of thing that's going to happen to Legend, that they're going to read this and it's not going to be recognizable as a fantasy that, the sort of fantasy that is being written today. And I think that's going to be a hindrance. But I'm sure there are people out there that are recommending this to their kids, that are recommending this to friends and whatnot. And that's a good thing. I mean, just take a look at the back. David Gemmell tells a tale of very real adventure, the stuff of true epic fantasy. R.A. Salvatore wrote that. The author of, the creator of the Doerden character and the Heroes of Icewind Dale. And pretty much the sole author of any Dungeons & Dragons novels coming out today, although there is a new Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman Dragonlance book that will be released in August, Dragons of Deceit. Keep your eye out for that. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up by saying thank you very much, Luke. This book was freaking awesome. So awesome that I already have the second book in the Draenei series ready to go, and I have ordered the next 4 in that series. One that I am very much looking forward to reading, reviewing, and finishing. So, follow along with Playlands Media. Comment, like, subscribe. Let me know what your favorite fantasy books are. If I haven't read them, I will definitely go out of my way to find them. Please follow us on Amazon, Facebook, YouTube here, of course, all that other good stuff. Go to our website, plaguelandsmedia.com. But more importantly, sit back, unwind, stay safe, read a fucking book, people.